Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Tomorrow. Andrew Knight and Moise Param, and a special guest for today, Rebekah Warren, which, before I intro you, let me just say, Mo and I have been working through a book the entire summer, a book titled The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And, I think Mo and I both will, kind of come to the conclusion that it's been a challenging book. I mean, there's, we're both in the mix of raising kids kind of in that age that this book really describes, and the struggles that they're going through with, the addition of this virtual world and virtual reality. And so to have you here with your expertise and just to be able to interview and to discuss this topic from your perspective with all your studies, I think is going to be a big blessing for us and our guest and audience. So anyway, so glad you're here.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
Having us. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, like Andrew mentioned, this book was very eye-opening for me. It's, there's so many challenges when it comes to raising children, right? I mean, the pressure's on you from the beginning, and then now with the outside influences that are outside of the parameters of your house, how do you control it? How do you monitor it? How do you make sure that your kids aren't left behind with technology, because technology really is, I won't say ruling the world, but if you're behind in technology, you're behind in a lot.
Oh, 100%.
But how do you blend that parental overview to make sure that they are being guided in the right direction? So, yeah, this book was very timely for me, for us, because I don't know if Amber told you, but our youngest is now homeschooled. Mm-hmm. And so, some of the reasons why we decided to go home to homeschool her was a little bit of some mental and social issues and anxiety that was happening with her. Mm-hmm. And so we decided that homeschooling was a good option for her. So all that being said, timely interview, timely conversations to have with you today. So how about just tell us a little bit more about, you, your background, and we jump right in.
Yeah. So I'm Rebekah Warren, and I live here in Cartersville, so in this community with you guys, and I am a therapist here in the community. And so I see kids and teenagers, adults, couples, and so I'm kind of at a wide range of clients right now. And I actually just graduated with my master's in clinical mental health. Thanks.
Yes.
It's good to have that grad school done.
The weight is off.
I know, all those exams and just
I'm sure your children and husband appreciate it.
Yes, and my children and husband are definitely glad that we're done with all of it. But so now I just get to work and serve and be with people, and so I love what I do. But I am not new to helping people, and so I've been in ministry life for a long time, over 15 years, and so just counseling was just kind of a new hat to serve in the strengths that God has given me. And so basically, my husband and I have been married for 15 years, and we have 3 kids, an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So
Yes.
We are just kind of right at this, kind of precipice of my oldest just started middle school last week. And, his friends, there were a bunch of kids in his grade last year that had phones and were on social media already. But we have not chosen to do that yet. But now 6th grade, it just kind of does feel like, oh, okay, like it's starting to become more prominent. And so It's like, okay, we know that these conversations are happening in our home, but I'm also just seeing it so much with clients and just how it impacts them. So
yeah, 6th grade's a big leap.
It is.
You know, especially with your oldest, which I know you and I were talking about this beforehand. I've taught your oldest a little bit in church. My wife and I, we serve in the children's ministry. And so, and your oldest, I would say, is a very typical firstborn child. I mean, he's seen, very stable, very solid. And then, you look at the others, and not just you, like for me, it's like they're so different, So then you look at how you're going to parent the oldest one entering into middle school. And, for us, it's not just what is the right thing to do in general for the population as a whole, for our youth, but then also how do you parent each child separately and what they can, contain and sustain the responsibility of over time. So, well, that's awesome. And 6th grade's tough, so we'll be praying for you. It's like a lot goes on. So when it comes to understanding the problem, just from your education and your background, I mean, what do you see as being the prominent challenge that our youth face with this wave that Jonathan Haidt talks about in the book, which is like, hey, this literally leap from a child, play-based childhood to this virtual-based childhood? What do you see as that being a problem?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing so much more anxiety and depression in kids, and just you think about like when we were young, like when kids were struggling with something, it was like, well, I'm going to run away. Now they start harming themselves. They say, I want to kill myself. And so that just hurts my heart so much that like we have gone to that extreme and it is happening.
Yeah.
And so kids are really struggling. And I love that Jonathan Haidt has done this work because it's really highlighting, hey, like he's done the research and he compiled all this research. And it's like, hey, notice when the shift started happening, and it's because of technology and social media. And of course, we can't just say it's only that, right?
Right.
We have changed too. The world has changed, right? And so just there's such a combination of factors, but our kids are suffering because of it. And so, it's such an interesting time to be in the work that I'm in, just with these struggles that these kids are having.
Yeah.
This may be a little bit off topic. Not really, it's really on topic actually. The diagnosis of anxiety and depression, right? Do you think that there is more diagnosis of anxiety and depression now, as far as like when we grew up? Like if you were nervous,
Right.
you were just nervous,
Yeah.
right? So or you just had you had butterflies in your stomach.
Right. Yeah.
If you were depressed, you were just sad over, a breakup or over a bad grade, or over a bad year at school or in sports. But it wasn't really clinically diagnosed as anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
So do you think that some of the reasons why that there's just an overreaching of trying to diagnose a situation?
Yeah, that's such a complex question, and I think there are so many different opinions on that.
Yeah.
Some of it's like, okay, maybe it's actually just getting reported more, right?
Right.
We're not as afraid to say like, hey, I've been dealing with this, like I've had this internal struggle going on. And so whereas, before there wasn't as much diagnosis and people were just kind of coping and having really bad coping mechanisms for it. And so, and not getting diagnosed ever. And so, there's just a little bit more, but I do think kind of one of your points, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if this was kind of where you're getting to, is that we used to use words like I'm just worried, or I'm a little nervous about something, and we've kind of gone to a more extreme. I'm anxious.
Yeah.
Whereas that feels a little bit more labeling and defining than I'm worried. And so that's actually some of the work that I try to help, especially teen girls, is really kind of understanding the scale of like intensity of like, okay, we have worry. And we can have worry up from like a 1 to a 4. And then like that 5 to 7 range, it's like, ooh, I'm feeling tense, or, and so we just kind of like learning how to scale things a little bit more, but we just jump to the extreme.
Yeah.
But some people really are experiencing that extreme physical, emotional, mental anxiety.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know if you've ever read this. It wasn't in this book, but, and I can't remember the book that I read it in, but it was a discussion about how much life had changed coming through like the Great Depression and the Industrial Revolution. And when you look at like even before the Industrial Revolution, young boys would grow up with their fathers in the field. And Jonathan kind of pointed a little bit to this aspect of, look, what we see today as a problem only was magnified by the creation of social platforms. But the problem existed and was continuing to get worse over decades.
Yeah.
And so when you go back before the Industrial Revolution, fathers woke up, they worked in the farm or in the community. Oftentimes they're young boys. They didn't travel all the way through school. They would get out, at an early age, drop out or whatever it may be, go to work for the family because they needed the money. But there was a lot of value that came with them shadowing their father, assuming their father was a good leader. Same thing with the daughters. Daughters, being basically spending all day with their mother. You get into the Industrial Revolution, and what you see is this transition of the father being in the house, really extracted into an industry, a plant,
Where the kid can't go.
60, 70 hours a week where the kid can't go. So now all of a sudden you don't have that, mentorship and that discipleship that you get from a father. And so, Jonathan kind of describes this in some aspects, and I think it's in point with what Mo's question was, that, we are definitely more, I would say, and I don't have the expertise to say it, but a more anxious generation.
Yeah.
We are, but that's both for adults and for children.
Absolutely.
And there's more adults now that are more anxious. And when you look at where we are today, it's like, okay, well, first off, adults, we're anxious for many reasons, but a lot of it's just because we're so darn busy. Yeah. We're doing too many different things. And then when you look at what we do to our kids, we do the same thing. Our kids, it's not just because they're on social media, it's because we drag them to, 125 different baseball games, from sun up to sundown. The only thing they can do in between the game is look at a cell phone, or in the car.
Yeah, to escape some of that rigorous calendar schedule that we hate, but we're putting it on the kids, right? I mean, I think Jonathan mentioned there was a transition of, this overwhelming influence of having kids be, I won't say perfect, but transitioning to like college, right? So everything is, how do you make your college resume, tip top and stand out against everyone, right? So you have to join the beta club, you've got to join the Spanish club, you've got to join the whatever club, you got to do leadership
SAT
here,
prep.
SAT prep, you've got to do this, you got to do that, and we've almost erased their childhood, or made them grow up faster than they should have.
It has been erased.
Yeah.
It really has. For a child that is plugged in any capacity, I'll just use my oldest real quick for an example. I highly recommended that he dropped a sport. He was playing 3 sports, and he just moved into his, sophomore year, where his class selection it's rigorous. And so I said, look, son, you're going to have to drop something. You can't do it all, right? Well, he drops a sport only to find out that the other sports require you to do things if you're not playing the sport. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you're not playing a fall sport, then you have to meet workout and conditioning and play for a particular training team for the other sport.
For the other sport.
I'm like, well, that defeated the purpose. Like, I didn't see that one coming. So from your perspective then, what are the aspects, okay? Just kind of narrow down to social media, okay? And the fact that you work with a lot of females, I think, is tremendous, because Jonathan Haidt really exploits the reality that this is a big issue for young girls.
Yeah.
When you look at social media, and then you look at the girls that you've worked with, what just stands out as being like the issue?
Yeah. One of my professors used to say, we need to think developmentally before we think diagnostically. And so really that's the challenge for us to okay, each age you're kind of, you have a task at hand, and there's all kinds of different theories, right? And so there's this Erickson's model of psychosocial development. That 12 to 18 age, the task at hand, the conflict that they're faced with, is identity versus confusion. Okay? So that is the role and the thing that they have got to really work through from that 12 to 18 range, is really forming their identity. And really the goal is fidelity, which I think is so interesting, and I love that word, even just because it's really being true to oneself. And so if they are constantly confused about who they are, they cannot be, they cannot have fidelity to themselves, because then that sets them up for the next task developmentally after 18. That is the intimacy versus isolation. And so if we're not able to form our identity, then we're not able then to move on to the next stage of having true intimate relationships. Wow. So if you start looking then, because I also work with adults and couples, what's really the issue that's I'm working with is they don't know how to have intimate relationships. They're afraid, or they dive way too fast, too quickly, and then they're too vulnerable and have chosen people that aren't safe people, right? And so we've got like this, hey, we didn't actually form our identities well. And so therefore we're setting ourselves up and not being able to have good, intimate relationships. So yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think like what you're saying is spot on, because if you don't know how to form your identity, or you don't know the basis of your identity, which is a bigger question, okay? And we all in this room share a very similar and common core of why we're here, how we got here, what we're doing here, and where we're headed after we leave, type of thing, okay? And so much of that belief, now I say much of that belief, all of that belief is how we ultimately define who we are. But that still doesn't, matter of fact, I'm thinking about last night, me and my wife were walking around downtown Adairsville. It's 8:30 at night. We're doing a walk. And we're talking about, just some friends of ours and some struggles or whatever. And we were talking literally about this statement, and because I was having a conversation with the gentleman, and I said, man, look, at the end of the day, I said, this is going to sound spiritual, but I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm speaking, and as I'm speaking, I'm like, man, this is something I need to hear, because I just don't do it well. But and we're talking, I said, look, the reality is you have to anchor yourself to the only thing that's consistent in your life, period. It's not, unfortunately, your wife will let you down, your children will let you down, your parents, your family, your friends, your work, and everything else. The one thing that doesn't is the one thing you have to anchor yourself to, which ultimately should be the source of your identity.
Right, yeah.
But, that's not easy. For an adult, it sure isn't easy for a 12-year-old who doesn't have the training and the raising. And so what do? They go to social media. Right. Yeah. And so I think you're 100% right. When I read the book and I'm thinking through, okay, what is the biggest issue? It's like, oh my gosh, identity. They not only do they not know how, their identity is really from other people that they don't even know, that doesn't even have an invested interest.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, whenever you take out social media, they're still working on their identity, but the pool is smaller, right? And so we're learning how to swim in a shallower pool, which is good, right?
Right.
And I know just whenever we think about this, we're opening the social media up to them. That is opening up the entire world to them. Right. And so it's like us driving out to the middle of the ocean and our child not knowing how to swim and us dropping them in the middle of the ocean and saying, good luck, be safe, with no instruction. And so it's being able to know that, okay, they are going to be forming their identity. How and where are they doing that? And I think especially for girls, they are looking for who they are, how other people view them, and then really seeking connection. And boys do this too. We're all wired for connection. But really with girls at this age is seeking that connection. And so when they're seeking connection through social media, it's going to fail them really poorly.
Yeah, because that validation that you're seeking and looking for, that's one of the things that social media, the way you find your validation, usually it's by how many followers you have, how many likes you have, how many thumbs ups, how many hearts you have for your photos. And so, if you notice that this person, this social media quote unquote influencer is getting X amount of buzz because of this type of photo, then it's natural to think that, well, I got to do something like that, right? In order to get the attention, to get the validation. And you mentioned, dropping the kids off in the middle of the ocean and not knowing how to swim, right? Parents are doing the same thing to themselves, right? Because they don't even know how to swim. They don't know how to navigate social media. So that lack of influence, that lack of mentorship, guidance, leadership in the household, if your parents are being distracted by the same technology that the kids are being distracted by, they're gonna find their identity. They're gonna find their mentor one way or another.
Right.
And if it's not in the house, they're gonna find it outside. And that's one of the challenges, right? Is back in the days, like you mentioned, your circle was small. Now your circle is the globe, right? It's people you don't even know, and you're getting so impacted by them. So it's
and that season too. That season of he kind of referenced pouring concrete.
Right, yeah.
And he talked about how the development of a child, it's super fast, it's slow, and then it's super fast again, and during that process, it's like it's so vital. I think you used the age range of like 12 to 18 or something like that, and it's just there's just those moments in that process that like you're not gonna be perfect as a parent, but you sure want to point the right direction, So when you're looking at the specific concerns, you had mentioned self-esteem, identity, probably one of the key components. Obviously, a lack of understanding those two create the anxiety. What about there's a lot too about like just the addictive use of it, and the cause of that keeping them from sleeping well, and that having once again additional effects that contribute back to anxiety. What do you think about that?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts.
Go to sleep.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. I think, and we touched on this a moment ago, too, that we do not know how to not be busy.
Yeah.
Right? So even our rest, think about the things that we do to rest and just chill. Like we go pick up our phones. Us as adults, we pick up our phones. We turn on the TV. We scroll. Mm-hmm. That's not rest. Mm-hmm. That is not your mind at rest. It might be your body at rest, kind of. But your mind is a part of your body. Your brain is a part of your body. Are you able to go and sit outside with no technology and go watch the sunrise? If you even do your own experiment on yourself, are you able to be still and just watch something very slowly change?
I'm not answering the question.
Right? And so this problem starts early for our kids because we have not been able to know how to navigate it for ourselves. Therefore, we have not been able to navigate it as we parent our really young kids. So to even think about our 3-year-olds, whenever, like that kind of thing about silence is actually really trouble with a toddler, right?
Right.
You're like, what are they getting into? Well, if I can turn something on, right? If I can turn the TV on, I know they're just going to be drawn to that. Then I can actually chill out for a second and not watch them, right? And so we've used technology as a parent in our homes, but that's actually taking away their experiences at a young age and not able to know how to be still, to be bored, to figure out a problem for themselves, to look around the room and say, what can I play with?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it starts really early on where we have wired ourselves to want to always be looking at something that is fast paced.
Yeah.
Even there's studies shown about like the way animation has changed, right, for our kids shows, and just how much more like how quickly the screens like shift, right? The scenes shift so much more quickly than shows when we were younger, whereas we were able to like hold attention for a lot longer time. And so just there's so many aspects, right?
Yeah,
and
you
I
just
don't know
hit several.
Yeah, it's are we able to be still and be at rest and be, my counselor used to tell me, she's like, have you gone and parked your mind? Like you need to be able to stop driving even at a 2 mile per hour. Just stop and just be still. And that's hard to do.
Yeah. When you think about the reels now, and even like some of the YouTube videos that at least my kids watch, and it's these characters that are, they I don't know if they put their whole show in like fast pace, like they're fast forwarding it.
Right,
They're increasing the speed of it. But I'm like, there's no way that guy's talking that fast. And he's just, they're just like going, and then the reels are just so short. And I've kind of wondered, has that also affected our children to the extent that they can't even now stay on social media to watch one thing for a longer period of time because their attention has been trained to hit a 15-second, 20-second reel, on to the next one. Well, so obviously we've discussed the challenge, many of the problems. There's a lot more, obviously, that could be, dug up from this. But when we're looking at solutions and intervention, we've talked about parents, how big of a role that is. Obviously, we probably all think it's the biggest role and responsibility to fill. But let's talk about like what can be done, what should be done, what are some ideas for parents that are out there that are just like all of us with kids that are in that age or entering that age, what do they need to be doing?
Yeah. I think one of the first steps is to look at ourselves as parents and what are my habits? What am I modeling? And gosh, I'm speaking to myself on this. Like, it's hard because of the world and work that we do. Like, a lot of my work is right there. So it's like, oh, I can respond to that client right now, right? Or just in, all kinds of, I can constantly be learning, listening to a podcast at 1.5 speed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So looking at our own habits is, I think, one of the first steps. Really evaluating what is it that we want our family to be about. Like, what do we want to do together? What makes us have fun together? What do we enjoy? Whether that's hikes or playing Uno, No Mercy. We just got that. It is crazy town.
Oh, yeah.
And just being able to, like, how are y'all playing and laughing together, right? Because that connection really is important. So I think that's one step. I think another step is, okay, then looking outside of your home. What is influencing my kid? What would I want to influence my kid? So being able to say, okay, well, maybe these are the places and the people that I would want to, my kid to be around. And so whether that's church or whether that's great mentorship programs, just being able to, like, say, okay, yeah, these are the other voices in my kids' lives, because, as we know, teenagers, they start listening to other people.
Yeah.
More than the parent,
Right.
even though we'll be saying the same thing. So find those people in your life that are going to say the same things, but they're going to hear it differently from that person. So I think that's one thing. And then even just practically, just habits of what technology, social media is in your home and outside of the home. What are the expectations? Are they allowed to have social media? Just really have a lot of conversations about, hey, this is how we act on social media. These are, things that maybe are not helpful for you. And having full access, I think, is really important too with your teenagers. If you have no idea how to get into their accounts or whatever, I personally think that's a problem. I think that you need to have full access.
And
Right.
that is probably
That's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
well, but that's prevalent. I mean, you know this in our industry, right? The amount of people who, I mean, we're having to help them figure out how to download an app. And I'm like, I know you ain't, there's no way you're able to monitor, And so, yeah, that's a big issue.
What do you say to the parent who is maybe scared of drawing or pulling back the reins on social media because of fear of child being harming themselves, or the fear of maybe their child getting bullied because they're the odd one out that doesn't have social media?
Right. Yeah.
Because I think there are a lot of parents that do feel that way.
Oh, yeah,
that it's
absolutely.
not that it's too late, but they feel like, gosh, I don't want to isolate or ostracize my kid because of that.
Right. Yeah. I think find some other people that think similarly to you. And it's kind of like one of those, there's safety in numbers in a way of like, hey, okay, yeah, I know so-and-so's mom, and I know they don't have social media. You think everyone has it, right? But keep gathering those people and have the conversations, right? Even if you realize that you're going to differ with with other parents, start having the conversations more, because I think the more that we're talking about it, the more that we're going to start realizing, like, oh, we do have a problem here. So I think that's one thing. I think also for parents, if they start realizing or having just that gut feeling that I think there's a problem here, obviously, if you start seeing signs of true depression, anxiety, self-harm, if they start saying things, or if you do get a peek at their social media and you're like seeing some concerning things, address it with them, and bring them into a counselor, please. That is definitely something. But if it's kind of before that, you're just kind of noticing some trends, some tendencies, what they're drawn to, just start talking to them a little bit more. Maybe ask them, hey, we could take a break for 2 or 3 days. Let's just see how you feel. And it's just kind of the same as addiction work, honestly.
Yeah.
Is like, hey, you will notice if it's a problem if you can't live without it.
Right.
That's what the definition of an addiction is. And so I think it's being able to recognize what's going on for them. And I think for being able to take it away, if you've given a phone early to a kid, I know some fourth graders, third graders that have phones, and you kind of are like, oh, I want to walk this back. Really think about, okay, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or what's the worst that could happen if I continue to let them have this without some good guidelines and good, boundaries on it. So kind of walk yourself down that road of what's the worst that could happen on both sides and compare those two.
Yeah. And be the parent,
Yeah.
The need to be intentional, to communicate with your kids. This is just what I've experienced with my boys. There's a huge opportunity cost, in my opinion, just letting your children have a phone without any boundaries. And the opportunity cost is for them. They don't know how to measure it, unless they've been taught to measure it, but I don't think they do. And what they do is they spend, all this time on social media without any boundaries. Not say social media, just on their phone in general. And then when they go to play a sport or play an instrument or do something, they're extremely behind, or they lack the ability to accomplish their goal because they didn't realize that they were spending, the few hours a day that they thought they, weren't losing to this. And so what I have found is, like, if with my boys, if I'm intentional, and once again, preaching to myself here, if I'm intentional and I go into my house, if I look at Drew, Ben, or Jake and I say, hey, get outside, go shoot some basketball. You're wasting time. It's about to be basketball season. You can get better. Okay? They're like, If I say, hey, I'm going to go outside and shoot some basketball. Y'all want to go? All phones drop. They're in, And so when I see that, I always think of how much, at least, my boys, and I assume it's for many children, they crave for their parents to be present and intentional, and really you see that because they will drop everything, it just like reading a book together or reading scripture together, it's like you think, okay, well, obviously I need to do it. I know it's something that's, I need to be discipling my kids. We need to work through this together. It's vital to their development. But then you wonder, like, is it going to be just a hassle for them? Are they really going to be interested? They're getting older. But when you do it, it's like, oh, they crave it. They want it. Yeah. So, just the communication and the intentionality by the parent it's vital.
Yeah. That's just where the leadership comes into play. Kids do want it. They want that bonding. They want the ability to connect. They're looking to connect. And I think that's the overarching theme of social media. They're looking for connection.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. For their identity, for validation. And so what better way to find it than with their parents, right? Whether it's shooting hoops, whether it's reading the Bible, like watching a movie, hiking, whatever it is, right? That time together is what's being lost.
And you can't get it back.
No, and that connection is so important. And I think sometimes we see ourselves as this role as a parent, and so we're like, okay, we start freaking out about all the things we haven't taught them, right? So then we start talking at them, right? And I say at them because we forget that we are supposed to be talking with them, because they live in this whole other world, right? Where they're with peers, where they're at school, in social media, or just, they're just out in the world. You don't have them. If they're 13, they're not right next to your side at all times, right? They're starting to form their opinions. So I really encourage parents to start asking more questions instead of lecturing, telling them what they're supposed to be thinking, right? Ask them. And really kind of almost in that Socratic questioning method of like, well, what do you think about that? And, well, why do you think that? And, well, let's maybe look at it from the other perspective. What if someone else said this? And so almost like having like a discussion that is a conversation, and that builds their connection. And maybe you're not going to both come to the same conclusion on something, but really that's okay. It's, have you connected, and is there a safety in that relationship where they can like say, hey, you know what, I can go to mom or dad and be able to have a conversation, and we can disagree on something, but there's still connection and love there. And so there's just not that like insecurity of that attachment with them.
That's that's important, because if I know just from experience when I worked here at the on the ambulance and the fire truck, some calls that we ran that were just very traumatic, and then also communicating with friends that have older children already. They've walked it out before me, and one of the things that some of the guys that I talked to have said is like, look, you really have to establish that safety and security in that communication with them. They got to feel comfortable, because there will come a day when the risks are higher.
Right.
Okay, the consequences are higher, and they need someone to talk to. And if they didn't get the security and the safety when they were 12, 13, 14, then when they're 17, 18, 19 and they're facing something serious, you may not be that person. So I think what you're saying is spot on. What about, so we talked about the parents. Now let's shift to like community and school. Okay. What should and what can, a school maybe implement and really promote to the kids and the students?
Yeah. I love this question, because as we know, not all kids are growing up in households that have two loving parents. And so there are kids that really do need, and kids even with two loving parents at home need outside influences. And so I think that we need to have some really good standards in our schools. I would love for our schools to really go screen-free. There's a lot of systems that are starting to do that in the Atlanta area, and I think that's great. They're around the country. There's starting to be little pockets of like, hey, we put our phones in this like little safety folder thing, and you'll get it back at the end of class or at the end of the school day. And so I know that starts like parents start really questioning, well, my kid's phone is going to get stolen, or what if I need to talk to them? Well, you call the office. You call the front office. So just being able to like set up some screen-free environments so that kids can connect with each other without, worrying about whatever text is coming through, whatever snaps coming through, or whatever. So I think that's one role. I think mentor programs, I know our community is so fantastic about this, and I just want to highlight that. Like Cartersville Bartow is awesome
Solid,
at mentor programs. And so we've got really good like advocates for children. We've got the mentors in the schools that we've got kids, sitting there at the elementary ages. We've got the Read to Grow program where adults can come in and just read with kids that are struggling. And we know that they're not just building their reading abilities, right? Like we are building their connection and safety and trust with people, right? So just all kinds of being able to promote those programs, get involved in those programs. We talked about being busy. A lot of times we're filling up our time with things that don't have meaning and value. Really look at your schedule and say, is everything I'm doing like, there can be some fun things that is meaningless, right? But like, are there areas in my life that I am providing value and meaning in my community? So some mentor programs, screen-free environments, I think would be really helpful.
Yeah.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, it shocked me when Alex was in high school, and Alex now is 21.
Yeah,
he's about to be 22, and he said his teacher would allow him to watch YouTube as a way to like either it's if he's done with his work, right? So he has the opportunity to watch whatever he wants on the screen, or as a way to not distract anyone else. And I was like, where did that come from, right? And I'm thinking maybe I thought it was just an Alex rule, right? Maybe he's maybe he's just teacher say you can just do it, but no, it's like all the kids can do it. And I just didn't understand how where and when that became acceptable, right? Where as a teacher you are saying to your kids, you cannot be present in this classroom mentally. And you can distract yourself from what I'm trying to teach for either your pleasure or just not to bother anyone else. Like when did that become an acceptable practice? And it's just so alarming.
Right. Yeah. Just because it's an effective tool at the goal of they needed some kids to work on something and some kids to just sit still, right? So it was an effective thing for maybe that teacher to do, but it's maybe not always the healthiest
Right.
thing, right?
Right. And, if there's no real guardrails or boundaries set at the higher level, the state, or even the local government, over the school systems, and it's like, how does a teacher even enforce it? I've been in the same situation. Drew's texted me in the middle of a school day, and I'm like, what are you doing? But our kids, my middle son yesterday, I was here late yesterday, and then I get home and I'm over a golf tournament. So when you're talking about busy, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't even want to describe my day yesterday. I get home immediately. I'm trying to get this stuff launched for this golf tournament that we're doing for a group that I'm a part of in Adairsville, and then I get done with that. I go out. We're getting ready to go on a walk, and I ask the kids if they want to go. And my middle son Benji, he's in there playing his game, right, in his bedroom. And he has always been a pretty consistent B student, right? And I'm one of those guys, like, look, at the end of the day, I feel like I should know my children's like academic capability, just like their skill set in any other area of their life. And so, I want to push them to that, right? But I was sitting there when I walked in, I'm like, Benji, we're at the start of the school year. Like, I just want you to know, if you have all this time to play the video game, then you have all the time in the world to make an A. In my opinion, and I don't know if that's harsh. It may be the wrong thing to do, but I'm sitting here thinking, like you're talking about, Alex, if they're in there and they're done with their work, and then they can swap over as a kid to not use this tool to enhance their ability to get better at the subject, but to actually play something, and then they score a C in the class, like that's you cannot give me your everything. Come on,
right? Yeah. And I think that's where the parenting comes into play. I think as a 13-year-old, right?
Yeah,
he's 13-year-old. He just turned 13. Yeah, I mean, who has the natural, thinking, a wiring to say, okay, well, I have time on my hands. Let me go study.
Right.
So I think that's where the parenting comes into play, because they'll fill their time with anything, right? So I think that's where kids need help, right? They need help with the shepherding, right? And saying, okay, well, man, how about you spend 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes just reviewing what you learned today, and then go play games.
And play games, and then push them to go outside.
And then push them to go outside.
Yeah,
right?
with all a good balance.
Yeah. Or as you were talking about the Adairsville Legacy
golf
tournament. Maybe a way of connecting with the kids is like, hey, come help me write this post. Hey, I took some pictures that I want to post. Like, help me. That's the way of bonding and connecting.
Speaking their language.
And you're speaking their language,
except,
right?
Except ChatGPT helped me. So.
Oh yeah. But no, I think there's that balance, right? Of how do we speak their language? How do we connect? How do we still help them with creating their identity, having that one-on-one time with them, and doing it in a way that we're not going to get it perfect.
Right.
I think that's the thing that I get out of this, out of the book and conversations with you and with you too, is just like, I'm not going to get it perfect.
Right.
There's a goal that I have, right? But as long as I'm marching towards that goal, it's just going to be a better outcome than not.
Yeah.
Well, we hit quite a bit.
Yeah.
Regarding the book and the subject and such an important topic. Yeah. We really did. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay. One final question to wrap it up.
Okay.
All right. So when you if you could think of one word that would be maybe the word of the year, if you will, or the word that a parent should default to as their one go-to word that encompasses what they need to do to guide their children.
Wow, that is a good question.
Is there a word that comes to mind?
Word of the year.
I think we've already been saying it, is connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that can mean so many different things, right? Whether that's side by side, face to face, is how am I connecting? What's the connection right now? Is our connection secure? Is our connection kind of shaky? And am I putting too much on them, right? Without being steady for them to come to me. I think that's really the goal.
Connection.
Being able to see them, to hear them. There's so many great resources, like to be able to help you learn how to connect with your kids. There's
Yes.
I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Raising Boys and Girls podcast. There's David Thomas and Sissy Goff are fantastic.
Oh, good.
Child and adolescent therapists. They're in Tennessee. They've written tons of books. So all of their books, their podcast is fantastic to help parents really know like what kids are going through at different stages of their life and how to connect with them. Fantastic work. Kurt Thompson's a great author. Just understanding neurobiology, if that's kind of stuff that interests you. There's a great book by a therapist here in the Atlanta area. It's the book called Seen, and it's by Dr. Chinway, and she wrote a book with a youth pastor. It's very short, very small, but basically like helping heal anxiety and depression in kids by just helping connect. So fantastic resources. I think that's really the goal.
You're right. We're not short of resources.
Yeah.
And that's a solid answer, by the way.
Yeah, I like
That's
that.
it.
Now, what about you? If anyone wants to connect with you, wants to speak with you about what they're going through, how does one connect with you?
Yeah, that's kind. I actually work at a practice here in Cartersville. So I see clients in person, but I also do telehealth. And that practice is Etowah Counseling Services. It's etowahcs.com. So you can always look us up there. We have a fantastic team there. Really wide range of people with different skill sets of what their kind of niche, counseling is. And so just whatever need you have, we probably have it. So.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Like at the end of the day, we all go through certain seasons of struggle, right? And if you're going through it, get help, right? Seek help. Whether it's with an organization like yourself doing what you do with the training, or you have a local group at your church, or some good good small group that you're surrounded with. Like, come on, we're all going through stuff, right? So much we just try to keep it in, and the reality is when you open up, you find out that everybody else is going through something similar, or they're going through something as well, right? So, walk this journey out together, and then also I would challenge the people out there that are grandparents that maybe do not have children in the house, and individuals that have chose to never have kids. You still have a role, get plugged in. There's so many children. I mean, so many children that are desperate for help, that need help, that you could and the whole Good to Great book that you and I went through. I mean, it's just, you want to make that transition well to the next season of your life, man, pick up a child, invest in them, and help them get to a place that otherwise they may not be able to get to. Right. It's monumental. So thank you so much.
Thanks for
Great
having
interview.
me.
Of course.
Yes. And we'll have to have you back again.
Yes.
Because you're fantastic. Well, we appreciate it. That's a wrap for Beyond Tomorrow. And for all of our viewers and listeners on our podcast YouTube channel, we will see you guys next week.